In the previous section, we revealed the cruel logic behind the Sri Lankan state's decision to wage a war of genocide against the Tamil people. Now, let us delve into the actions pursued, the impact of this decision, and how it played out. The Sri Lankan government was determined to eliminate any witnesses to their atrocities. To achieve this, they ordered all international agencies to leave the conflict zone. The United Nations was the last to depart, reluctantly complying with the government's warning, fearing for the safety of their staff. Frightened civilians, aware of the impending danger, desperately tried to prevent the UN from leaving as their presence offered some measure of protection. Meanwhile, the government restricted access to the theatre of war for independent media, favoring its own daily news and the Island publications, known for its support of the military approach. Instead, the Sri Lankan media was forced to serve the state's propaganda. Journalists who refused to toe the government line were silenced. Some disappeared mysteriously, while others were forced to flee the country to escape persecution. In 2009, Reporters Without Borders ranked Sri Lanka 165th out of 173 countries in terms of freedom of press. Dharmaratnam Shiva Ram, a renowned Tamil journalist, was among those murdered by the Sri Lankan state. He met a tragic end, was abducted, and killed in a high-security zone near the parliament. With no international agencies or independent media to report on their actions, the Sri Lankan government launched merciless and brutal bombardments on civilian centres as the army advanced. The Chinese government played a significant role in providing military supplies and diplomatic cover to President Mahinda Rajapaksa, enabling him to ignore international pressure. The Indian government pretty much did the same. As the war progressed, civilians were deceived into seeking refuge in so-called safety zones, only to be deliberately bombed by the Sri Lankan forces. Despite the government's efforts to control information, news of the atrocities began to surface through the internet and social media. In December 2008, the Genocide Prevention Project identified Sri Lanka as one of the 8 red alert countries where genocide and mass atrocities were occurring or at risk of breaking out. In February 2009, Bruce Fein, a former U.S. Deputy Attorney General, drew a comparison between the ongoing massacres in Sri Lanka and the Bosnian Srebrenica genocide in an article published in the Boston Globe. He emphasized the indiscriminate bombing that specifically targeted Tamil civilians during the conflict. On the 17th of May 2009, the war ended as several of the LTTE's military leaders, including its leader Vila Pillai Pirapaharan, perished on the battlefield. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, an Australian newspaper of 14 May 2011, on the same day, Nadesan and Puladevan, two senior political leaders of the LTTE, who were carrying a white flag to surrender, were gunned down. This incident occurred in response to a text from Palitha Kahona, who was not only Sri Lanka's foreign secretary and the public face of the country's war against the LTTE but also a dual Sri Lankan Australian citizen. The paper reported this in a full-page article titled, "Australian Entangled in a Final Act of Civil War." Hundreds of the LTTE soldiers who had surrendered to the Sri Lankan army were summarily executed on the battlefield, and several thousands of others taken into custody were never to be heard again. In 2011, the panel of experts set up to advise Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon on accountability issues with respect to the final stages of the conflict in Sri Lanka and found credible reports of war crimes committed during the war. The UN estimated that at least 40,000 people were killed. Father Rayapu, a Catholic bishop, estimated the civilian killed during the final days of the war to be around 145,000. The UN's internal investigation, conducted in late 2012, brought to light a sobering truth. The civilian deaths at the hands of the Sri Lankan state could have been prevented had the UN remained in the war zone. Instead, the organization succumbed to pressure, betraying its principles and responsibilities. The investigation's conclusion pointed to a grave failure of the UN to adequately respond to early warnings and the evolving situation during the conflict's final stages and its aftermath. This failure had severe consequences for hundreds of thousands of civilians, contradicting the very principles and responsibilities the UN was meant to uphold. Although the war had ended, the government continued to hunt down those who were former members of the LTTE or were suspected to have had links to the movement. Fearing death, thousands of Tamils fled seeking asylum in foreign countries. The government further maintained a substantial military presence in the Tamil homeland, drawing the attention of the International Crisis Group, a prominent think tank. Their observation in 2014, 5 years after the war's end, revealed an alarming 1-to-5 ratio of military personnel to civilians in the region. This raised concerns about the impact on civilian life and the need for demilitarization efforts. Also, despite the unwavering protest primarily led by Tamil women, demanding accountability from the government for the thousands of missing individuals, the government has callously and defiantly ignored the pleas. By the 12th of August 2022, this protest had endured for over 2,000 days since its inception. It continues relentlessly, questioning the Sri Lanka state's blatant disregard for the plight of the disappeared and its determination to impose a coercive peace. Meanwhile, no attempt has been made to address the situation that gave rise to a long and bloody conflict since it was brutally put down in 2009. Instead, the Sri Lankan state has erected multiple victory monuments in Tamil areas, like this example in Puthukudi, to remind the Tamil people of their subjugation. The evidence before us leaves no room for doubt. The Sri Lankan state's pursuit of a victor's peace is glaringly evident. However, this approach is not only unjust and coercive but also fundamentally unstable. The government's actions, such as dismissing concerns of disappearances, erecting victory monuments in Tamil areas, maintaining a heavy military presence in the Tamil areas, and refusing to address the fundamental causes that led to a bloody conflict, make this abundantly clear. In light of the resilient resistance demonstrated by the Tamil people against the Sri Lankan state's imposition of coercive peace, an enduring peace can only be achieved through a restructuring of the state to embrace a federal structure. This approach would acknowledge and respect the distinct identities and aspirations of all people and thus foster reconciliation and sustainable peace.
If you are interested in exploring the subject covered in this video further, we encourage you to watch the following videos through the provided links. Please copy and paste the links. Please feel free to comment, but keep your comments brief. Thank you.